In this episode, we move into a topic that often sits quietly in the background until the moment something goes wrong and everyone suddenly wishes they had paid closer attention to it. Operational log management is about creating, collecting, protecting, reviewing, and using records of system activity so an organization can understand what happened, when it happened, and what it means for operations and control. For a brand new learner, logs may sound like technical leftovers that only engineers care about, but they are far more important than that. They help teams troubleshoot outages, investigate suspicious behavior, confirm that services are working normally, and show auditors that important activities are being monitored in a disciplined way. A company can have good technology and skilled staff, yet still struggle badly if it cannot reconstruct events after a failure, a mistake, or a security concern. That is why operational log management matters so much. It turns scattered technical activity into usable organizational evidence, and that evidence supports reliability, accountability, and better decision-making across the entire environment. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A log is simply a record of something that happened in a system, application, device, or service. That event might be a user signing in, a file being accessed, a server starting up, an application failing, a network connection being established, or a backup job completing successfully. On their own, individual log entries may seem small and unremarkable, but together they create a running history of how the environment behaves over time. Operational log management is the process of making sure those records are generated intentionally, stored appropriately, reviewed meaningfully, and kept available for troubleshooting, monitoring, and accountability. Without that process, logs often exist in random places, use inconsistent formats, disappear too quickly, or grow in such huge quantities that nobody can make sense of them when needed. Good management brings order to that situation. It helps the organization decide which events matter, how long records should be kept, who can use them, and how those records support both day-to-day operations and deeper investigations later. One reason this matters so much is that technology environments are constantly doing things that people cannot watch directly. Users interact with systems at high speed, services communicate with one another behind the scenes, automated processes run overnight, and countless small actions occur without anyone standing there to observe them in real time. Logs act as the memory of that activity. When an application slows down, a database fails, or a service becomes unavailable, support teams often depend on logs to reconstruct the sequence of events that led to the disruption. The same is true when performance seems normal at one moment and then suddenly degrades under load. Without log records, teams are forced to rely on guesswork, scattered recollection, or incomplete user reports, which usually makes diagnosis slower and less reliable. Operational log management gives organizations a better way to understand hidden system behavior. It preserves the history of actions and events so that when something unexpected happens, the organization has evidence instead of only assumptions. Logs are also valuable because they serve many purposes at once, and that makes them one of the most versatile sources of operational insight in an environment. Operations teams use them to diagnose failures, confirm service recovery, and understand how systems behave under stress. Security teams use them to identify suspicious activity, investigate misuse, and determine whether an event was isolated or part of a broader pattern. Administrators use them to validate routine work such as backups, scheduled jobs, system updates, and account activity. Auditors use them as evidence that monitoring and control processes are active rather than merely described in policy. Management may even rely on log-derived information to understand recurring issues, capacity trends, or the effectiveness of new controls after a change. Because logs serve so many audiences, operational log management has to balance technical detail with usability. The goal is not to collect records for their own sake. The goal is to preserve useful evidence that can answer real questions when systems, services, or people need clarity. A beginner should also understand that not all logs are the same, and different parts of the environment produce different types of records. Operating systems record events related to startup, shutdown, authentication, resource issues, and service behavior. Applications often record transactions, internal errors, processing steps, and failures specific to the business service they provide. Network devices may record connection attempts, configuration changes, and traffic-related events that help explain communication problems or unusual activity. Databases keep records of queries, access attempts, changes, failures, and performance-related conditions that may matter greatly when business applications depend on stored data. Cloud platforms, identity services, backup systems, and security tools all create additional log information with different purposes and levels of detail. This variety is one reason operational log management requires planning. If teams do not understand which sources matter most, they may spend too much effort collecting low-value data while missing the records that would actually explain a critical outage, a failed control, or a suspicious chain of events. The content of a log entry matters just as much as the existence of the log itself. A useful entry usually tells a story in small form by showing what happened, where it happened, when it happened, and how serious or unusual the event appears to be. If a record merely says error without indicating the affected system, the related user, the time, or the nature of the problem, then its value is limited. Strong log design gives enough context to help responders connect the event to a real operational situation. That might include the service involved, the type of event, the result of the action, the source of the request, or the component that generated the message. The goal is not to make every entry overly long, but to make it meaningful enough that people can use it later. Poorly designed logs create a painful situation where information technically exists, yet it is too vague, inconsistent, or incomplete to support real troubleshooting or investigation when business pressure is high. Time is one of the most important details in any operational log, because the value of a record drops sharply if teams cannot trust the sequence of events. When an outage happens, responders often need to know whether the storage problem came before the application failure, whether the failed login attempts occurred before or after a network change, or whether a service restart happened before performance improved. If system clocks are inconsistent across the environment, the story told by the logs becomes confusing and sometimes misleading. One device may appear to show the beginning of an issue when in fact it was only recording with the wrong time. That is why mature environments care about clock consistency and timestamp accuracy. Even if the user never sees this directly, the quality of incident analysis depends on it. Operational log management is not only about storing messages. It is also about preserving an accurate timeline so people can reconstruct what actually happened instead of trying to untangle events from records that disagree with one another. Collection and centralization are major parts of the process because logs scattered across many devices are hard to use when time matters most. If every server, application, device, and service keeps its own records in isolation, responders may waste valuable time signing into different systems, searching different formats, and piecing together fragments by hand. Centralized collection does not mean every log from every source must be treated identically, but it does mean the organization creates a more manageable way to gather important records into a location or process where they can be reviewed, searched, correlated, and protected more effectively. This is especially helpful during fast-moving incidents because patterns that look ordinary in one system may appear much more significant when viewed alongside related events from several systems. Centralization also supports consistency in retention, access control, and monitoring. Without it, important records may be lost or overlooked simply because they lived on a device that was replaced, reset, or unavailable just when the organization needed the evidence most. Retention is another core concept, and it raises a practical question every organization must answer. How long should logs be kept? Keeping records for too short a time can make investigations, audits, and trend analysis much harder because evidence may disappear before anyone realizes it will be needed. Keeping everything forever may sound safe, but it can create storage costs, management burden, privacy concerns, and difficulty finding what really matters among enormous volumes of old data. Good operational log management therefore aligns retention with business need, legal or regulatory expectations, system criticality, investigation requirements, and the realistic value of the information over time. Some logs support only near-term troubleshooting and may not need long retention, while others may be essential for compliance, dispute resolution, or long-running investigations. What matters most is that the decision is deliberate and understood. Weak environments let retention happen by accident, often based on default settings. Stronger environments decide what should be preserved, why it should be preserved, and how it will remain usable when needed later. Protection of logs is just as important as collection because records lose value if they can be changed, deleted, or viewed by unauthorized people. Logs often contain operationally sensitive information, and in some cases they may also contain details about users, system structure, internal processes, or events that could help an attacker understand the environment. If someone with bad intent can alter records after inappropriate activity, then the logs no longer provide trustworthy evidence. If too many people can browse them casually, confidentiality may also be harmed. Operational log management, therefore, includes access control, integrity protection, and careful handling of the systems where logs are stored and reviewed. The organization should know who can read logs, who can manage collection processes, who can change settings, and who can delete or archive records. This matters from both security and audit viewpoints. A record is only useful if the organization can reasonably trust that it reflects what actually happened and was not quietly rewritten after the fact. Review is where log management becomes active rather than passive. Collecting large volumes of records without meaningful review is like installing many cameras and never looking at the footage unless a crisis already becomes obvious. Some logs are reviewed manually, especially in smaller environments or for especially important systems where human understanding of context is essential. Other logs support automated monitoring that highlights unusual patterns, recurring failures, repeated access problems, or combinations of events that deserve attention. In either case, the key idea is that logs should inform action. They should help the organization detect trouble earlier, respond with better information, and identify recurring weaknesses before they become major business disruptions. Review also needs clear ownership. If no one is responsible for watching, analyzing, or escalating meaningful events, then collection alone offers false comfort. Good operational log management ensures that the right people know what to look for, how often to review it, and what should happen when log evidence suggests something important is changing. A common misconception is that more logs always mean better control, but volume without discipline can actually make operations harder. Excessive logging can bury important signals inside a flood of low-value messages, increase storage and processing burden, and make analysts numb to constant noise. When everything looks urgent, very little receives the focused attention it deserves. That is why quality matters more than sheer quantity. Organizations need to think carefully about which events are truly useful for operations, security, audit, and performance understanding. They also need to tune review practices over time, so repeated harmless messages do not drown out the events that really indicate risk or instability. In practical terms, good log management is an exercise in judgment. It is not about capturing every imaginable event forever. It is about choosing meaningful visibility, organizing it well, and shaping the process so the organization can separate normal background activity from the patterns that deserve investigation or response. Operational log management also becomes especially valuable after incidents, because this is when records move from being background detail to central evidence. When a service fails, teams often use logs to trace the first visible symptom, identify the affected components, confirm whether a recent change played a role, and determine what happened before recovery was attempted. After service is restored, logs help with follow-up analysis by showing whether the issue was isolated or recurring, whether temporary fixes actually stabilized the environment, and whether warning signs existed before users noticed the problem. This makes logs essential to problem management, root cause analysis, and continuous improvement. They help organizations move beyond vague statements, such as something started acting strange, and toward more precise understanding of timelines and contributing conditions. For beginners, this is one of the strongest reasons to take logs seriously. They allow teams to learn from disruption in a grounded way, using evidence to improve operations rather than relying on memory and opinion after a stressful event has already passed. From an audit and governance perspective, Operational log management reveals whether the organization is managing its environment with real visibility or simply hoping that important events will be noticed somehow. An auditor is not expected to read every technical message, but should be able to assess whether important systems generate useful logs, whether those logs are collected and retained appropriately, whether access is controlled, whether review occurs, and whether the organization can show that records support monitoring, troubleshooting, and accountability. Weak environments often show familiar warning signs. Logging is inconsistent, retention is accidental, ownership is unclear, and teams discover during an incident that the records needed to explain the event were never captured or were already gone. Stronger environments may still face complexity, but they can explain their approach and show that log management is deliberate, not accidental. For a new CISA learner, that is the central insight. Logs are not background noise. They are operational evidence, and managing them well is a sign that control, oversight, and resilience are being taken seriously. Operational log management should feel much more important than a technical housekeeping task that happens out of sight. It is the discipline of turning system activity into trusted, usable evidence that supports operations, security, audit, and long-term improvement. Good log management means deciding what should be recorded, making sure those records are meaningful and time-consistent, collecting them in a usable way, protecting them from loss or tampering, reviewing them with purpose, and keeping them for a period that matches business need. When organizations do this well, they gain visibility into how their systems actually behave instead of relying on assumptions. When they do it poorly, they often discover the weakness only after an outage, an investigation, or an audit has already exposed the gap. For a beginner, the most valuable takeaway is simple. Logs help organizations remember, and organizations that can remember accurately are far better equipped to troubleshoot problems, understand risk, and strengthen their operations over time.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.